and she preferred to win it, but she didn't mind the argument. She didn't like people who just said, yes, Prime Minister, yes, Prime Minister. And they didn't last very long. She preferred, first of all, intelligent people who agreed with her, but secondly, intelligent people who disagreed with her, and then she'd try and beat them down. But she agreed with, and she knew the importance of having an argument.
In the early years, if somebody would say to her, well, no, Prime Minister, I don't think that's quite right, she would kind of round on you with her eyes blazing, and you had to be very quick with why she was not quite right and give her another piece of information. I can remember one occasion when she turned to me and she said, Edwina, we've got decisions to take about building hospitals. Why should we build a new hospital in your constituency in Derby when it's my constituents in Finchley who are having a very hard time with very long waiting lists? And I had to think fast. And I said, well, because actually my constituents in Derby are queuing up with yours in Finchley. And if we can build a new unit up north, then it will ease the difficulties down south. Ah, she said, and seemed to be perfectly happy with that. If you were going to argue with her, you had to have good information. And then she would be instantly fascinated at what you had to say and just absorb it from you.
On the 3rd of January 1989, Mrs. Thatcher celebrated her place in history as Britain's longest-serving Prime Minister after Robert Walpole. By now, she was becoming increasingly intolerant of those opposed to her policies.
I have no idea what John Nott has said. John Nott was a very vivid, vital, interesting member of our cabinet, full of new ideas.
He said your leadership was over the top, Mrs. Thatcher.
Gradually, as time passed, the tendency to listen only to the people who agree with you grew. It grows with everybody. It grew with Tony Blair. You could see it happening. It does happen when people go on too long. You tend only to be comfortable with the people who are saying how marvellous you are. And that tendency asserted itself. And I think in all the discussions about the poll tax, for example, that tendency became quite important.
Later, it got much harder. And we would go and see her with information about the economy and difficulties, issues to do with the recession that came after she left. And she was not interested. She only wanted to hear good news from there onwards.
Now loath to tolerate disagreement, Mrs. Thatcher was equally suspicious of flattery.
I think in the inner circles of politics, she did detect that sometimes flattery was for self-advancement, and there would be people who would say, Prime Minister, you are the greatest Prime Minister the world has ever seen, and so on. And I suspect she felt that was flattery for personal advancement, and she detected it. And I think she respected people more who disagreed with her, and then, had the fierce argument with her than those that agreed with everything she wanted to do and say.
When in 1987 Margaret Thatcher won a third term in office, such was her grip on the nation's psyche, few would have predicted that just 2 years later she would be ousted from office by members of her own parliamentary party and cabinet. On leaving Downing Street for the last time, the cameras would capture a rare display of emotion and genuine sadness. But even in retirement from the top job, Mrs. Thatcher would continue to exert a powerful influence over her party, including the choice of her successor, John Major.
Quickly, partly out of a feeling of guilt, I think, the parliamentary party moved in the direction which she was, as it were, counselling. It wasn't only that. I mean, John Major was a very attractive candidate, but it moved towards him with a speed which, I must say, rather surprised me, and I think Michael Heseltine were the other two contestants.
Similarly, her support for William Hague in the Conservative leadership election of 1997 did not go unnoticed.
I am supporting William Hague. Now, have you got the name? William Hague. Vote for William Hague for principal government, following the same kind of government which I led, and vote for him on Thursday. Got the message.
Thank you very much indeed.
I think she was often a distraction, and that can cause problems because it means that you're trying to get across some new message about the future, about what the party will do in the future, and the arrival of Margaret Thatcher at a conference would dominate it. And it wasn't so much that she was a problem in herself for what you were trying to do. It was just that she would get so much attention that you wouldn't then be able to communicate anything else.
Mrs. Thatcher was all too aware her popularity within her own party had waned. But if she felt any rejection at home, she could guarantee a warm reception abroad, particularly in America, where she would return again and again.
She has had a pretty rough time, and I think she's found consolation in the kind of reception she gets abroad, particularly in America. And she finds there she can relive former glories.
But whatever the reception abroad, life out of office was inevitably not the same.
Then, reaching into her famous handbag, Lady Thatcher left British Airways in no doubt about her view of the new design.
I don't think Margaret Thatcher has had a single genuinely happy day since she left office. She lived for the job, and it was really what mattered to her. And I think she has felt strangely adrift ever since.
It was perhaps appropriate that a Prime Minister who adopted a presidential approach to office should look to America for sustenance. Likewise, the term presidential would creep into the British political lexicon, and if imitation is the greatest form of flattery, it would later be applied to her Labour successor, Tony Blair.
The whole of her premiership, once it got going, 18 months to 2 years in, was all about leading from the front. And I think that subsequently, certainly Tony Blair was the first to acknowledge that the old idea that you could, as it were, have a sort of cosy consensus and that every decision could be taken to Cabinet and mulled over and argued with Cabinet, and that the result of the Cabinet compromise is the way to go forward, that's changed ever since.
Let us ignore the howls and threats of the extremists. Let us stand together and do our duty, and we shall not fail.
Mrs. Thatcher's style is central to our memory of the longest-serving Prime Minister of the 20th century. Her public image matched her private self, always forthright, sometimes contradictory. And while historians may argue and opinions vary as to the merits of her achievements, our first woman Prime Minister is guaranteed to be remembered as one of the great female leaders of Britain, following in a tradition dating back hundreds of years. In the next programme, the extraordinary story of Mrs. Thatcher's fall from office.